Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to chat with you guys a little bit about the value of microplates and microloading, which is something that I'm a big fan of, I'm a big believer in. And it's something that some people laugh at, they think is useless, but you'd be surprised how many very, very serious coaches are big fans of microplates. Now, for those who don't understand what they are, microplates are when we go even smaller than the 2.5s. 1.25 pound plates, 1 pound plates, half-pound plates. These are called microplates or fractional plates. And what they're used for is when you need weight changes that are less than 5 pounds. And this matters both for big exercises, particularly for more advanced lifters or for relatively weak lifters. And relatively weak could be in ratios versus what we normally use on the weights, meaning a smaller man who's starting out, or a lot of women are always going to be weaker in terms of what we would think of as relative percentages as far as 5 pound jumps go. In other words, women who squat in excess of 300 pounds are pretty rare in the grand scheme of things, right? For men, that's normal. That's perfectly average to squat over 300 pounds for any man who's been in the gym for any length of time who actually trains the barbell squat. But a woman who squats 300 pounds, you're now talking about an extremely serious strength athlete, a competitor at that point. So when you're realizing that and looking at it from that perspective, it makes sense that sometimes from a programming perspective or to get through stalls, that microplates become extremely useful. Or when we're dealing with smaller exercises that we're trying to program carefully that we really care about other than just metabolic fatigue. So one of the points that gets brought up for people who don't have plates like I have, they don't have calibrated plates. A lot of people will point out that these fractional plates are kind of useless. Yeah, for me they work because all of my plates are less than a pound variation on the bar. In other words, I have expensive calibrated plates. If there's 500 pounds loaded on the bar, my weight is guaranteed to be less than a half pound off. So if it's listed at 500, there's no way it is more than 500.5 pounds, and that's even a stretch, or less than 499.5. And that's only if I use my worst plates. My better plates, it's way, way less variation than that because they're calibrated and they're dialed in. So the argument being made by many people is that the big 45-pound plates at most gyms, because they're budget plates, they're off by significant amounts. And people will say, well, how much? What do you mean by they're off? Well, a 45-pound plate generally means it's probably somewhere between 43 and 47. So when you look at it from that perspective, people are already saying, okay, wait a minute. What does a pound or a pound and a half matter in the grand scheme of things when your plates are 2 pounds off either direction? Well, there's a couple ways to look at that. I'm going to argue that doesn't matter in the way that people think it does, simply because we're dealing with, number one, the law of averages. Number two, we're still dealing with general upward trends in small amounts. And what I mean by with the law of averages there, the stronger you get, the more you'll benefit from the smaller increases in messing with microplates. Well, the stronger you get, the less variation there's going to be on your plates and bars. And what I mean is that the more plates you add in, the less likely you are to be statistically off from your average. Because if you're dealing with a bunch of random plates, let's say you're dealing with cheap plates, usually in a gym, your cheap plates are from one brand are going to be off in one direction mostly. It's not going to be as bad plus or minus, first of all. But let's assume it is. Let's assume you're just using random plates that your gym has accumulated over the decades from 12 different manufacturers. And so your entire plates there are averaging plus or minus 1 to 2 pounds. And it's like flipping a coin each time. Are you up or down, and then how much? And if you go through there and do a bunch of coin flips, you're going to find they tend to average out. So the more plates that you add, the more it averages out towards a more average distribution the majority of the time. Also, what you can do is that you can always use the same brand of plates so that your variation is going to be less. So usually, unless you need 10 plates and you're forced to use a variety of plates at a gym, usually most of you for your lifts, you aren't going to be using more than about 4 plates a side. I'm going to say the overwhelming majority of lifters aren't going to get more than 4 45-pound plates per side on the bar for any sort of real rep work for quite a few years. And even then, it's probably only going to be your deadlift and then the squat eventually. So since most of your lifts aren't using that many, you can always use the same basic plates or pretty similar plates. People come into the gym who go to a regular gym and they, as a general rule, a lot of times you get stuck on your favorite plates. Like people like to use their favorite plates in the gym. And what's funny is that it's men generally gravitate towards the lighter ones. So I seem to lift more with those plates always. They're my special plates. Like no, because those are the ones that are all a pound lighter or 2 pounds lighter, and that's why you lift more. But the point is, if you're always using the same plates, you start to remove the randomness a lot more. And if you have a home gym and you're always using the same plates, the randomness is gone completely, because you know what? Your 407 that's supposed to be 405 on the bar is always 407 every time without fail. So even though you might have the number off by 2 pounds, you are being consistent. And if you are being consistent, then the microplates work perfectly. Now, the other thing to consider with that, before we get into the nuances of what you would use the plates for, you're still dealing with an upward trend. Let's say you're plateauing a lot and you're stuck at certain weights at different points. Even if there is some variation of a pound or two difference and you're only adding an additional pound or two with the microplates, it averages out. And what happens is that when you look at the wave loading, if you were to plot it out over time and plot out a plus or minus, that your entire weight on the bar is off by up to 5 pounds either direction, and then you plot it over months and months, but you keep adding the microplates to micro load up, you're still going to find that you're controlling a constant and a slide of a small variable. So in terms of creating an upward trend, a small upward trend in your programming, you're still creating that with the use of the fixed microplates, even if the weight on the bar has some variation due to cheaper plates and has some randomness up and down. So that you have an approximation of what's on the bar, but you have, let's say you're dealing with a bar, you have a plus or minus 5, 400 pounds plus or minus 5. Well, you can make it 402 plus or minus 5, and 404 plus or minus 5, and 406 plus or minus 5. Therefore, you are controlling that. So they're still valuable. Now, the microplates are also useful in general, not just for really strong lifters who need to start micro-loading up through plateaus, because that is the way it works. If you're stuck at 500 pounds on the deadlift, for example, and you haven't been able to lift more than 500 pounds for several months, and you're stuck there, sometimes coming in and adding those microplates is such a small difference that you don't notice it. And therefore you break through a psychological barrier. So microplates can not only help you once you have the weight constant, even though you're dealing with some variation, there's still that psychological thing going on in our minds to where we say, well, it's 500, even if it's plus or minus 5. In our head, that's 500, and that's what I'm stuck at. Or we're stuck at 495. And we're scared to do the 500. Well, you can micro-load your way up to it. It's great for breaking through psychological barriers. Now, the other thing that should be obvious to people also, when you're dealing with weaker lifters, again, a woman who's squatting 95 pounds, or a man who's trying to work with a smaller number like 95 pounds on this strict standing press. You know what? I might talk about, oh, you guys need to get to a 200 press. Well, you're going to have to get to a 95 press first. What you find is that 5 pound jumps for those lifts are too much from a programming perspective. Meaning, let's say you're doing 3 sets of 5 and you're trying to increase 5 pounds a week. Well, if you barely get 3 sets of 5 on a linear progression with a weight that's only 95 pounds, a 5 pound jump will pull you outside of your rep range. It'll pull you outside of your programming. The microplates help with that. Or when people do resets as novices, a lot of times a lifter will say, well, I've done the weight reset. I stalled at 120 pounds and I did the 10% reduction, then I ramped it back up and I got stuck at 120 pounds again and I couldn't get past. I tried to get to 125 and I failed. Right. Well, that's where the microplates would come in. Instead of doing a 5 pound jump, you could do a 2.5 pound jump. And you might find that it helps you break through that plateau. Because occasionally with our strength gains and with our training and our programming, we reach thresholds to where literally a 5 pound jump kills your ability to progress. Or for people who are doing really slow linear progression, that ability to add 1 pound, to add 2 pounds, to add 2.5 pounds, slowly over time ensures progressive overload. So microplates are extremely valuable. Extremely valuable. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.